Welcome back for our deep dive discussion into poetry. Last month we discussed the nature and structure of sonnets. We examined their history and the two forms that they take, the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan. This month we are going to be discussing another form of lyrical poetry called the elegy, which is described as a poem of serious reflection, typically a lament for the dead. Whereas sonnets usually have love as the driving emotion, elegies are driven by deep and profound sorrow. The model for the contemporary elegy comes from John Milton's 17th century poem, Lycidas, which the poet wrote about the death of his friend. There's an interesting narrative structure. There is a disturbance, like a loss or death, and the poet responds by essentially asking themselves how they feel about it. But it's not just about the feeling. It's about exploring what the feeling is like by comparing it to something else. Every elegy has four distinct characteristics or discussion points: death and loss, expressing grief, it uses elegiac form, and is reflective. At this point, you might be asking, hey Garrett, what's elegiac form?
Yeah, what is that?
Glad you asked. Elegiac form is the poetic structure that an elegy uses.
Duh!
Now, hear me out, because just like the sonnet, the elegy gets pretty technical. An elegy uses alternating lines of dactylic, hexameter, and pentameter. Like I said, it gets technical. So let's review. Dactylic meter is a combination of three syllables. The first syllable is long or stressed, and the next two are short or unstressed. Now look at the profile of your index finger, fully extended like a gun. Now if you look at the points starting from the top of the palm, the first segment is long and the next two moving up towards the fingertip are short. Remember, the word dactylic means finger-like.
I've got a finger for you, Trebek.
So now that we have that taken care of, let's refresh on pentameter. Pentameter, or penta, means five. So that means that we are going to have 5 sections of whatever meter that we are going to be using for our poem. Now, let's tackle hexameter for a moment. If you're familiar with your Greek roots, hex means 6, as in hexagon or hex key. If pentameter means that we're using 5 sections of meter, then hexameter means we will be using 6 sections of meter. Now, given that an elegy alternates from hexameter to pentameter, your odd numbered lines are going to have 18 syllables, while your even numbered lines have 15 syllables. I want you to be careful, though, not to confuse syllables with words. You can have a word with multiple syllables in your line, and you'll probably have less than 15 to 18 words in that line, and depending on where it falls. As for the rhyming, that's actually optional. Most contemporary elegies don't use any rhyme scheme at all. But if you're interested in having fun with it, I would recommend a simple ABAB pattern. While written in a slightly different format, here is an original example from my book, The Lover, the Fighter, and the Philosopher. Being here. Have you ever felt the love you have for someone slip through your fingers like the richest extra virgin olive oil as it drips through a sieve in its crystalline container? It weighs on your shoulders like the burden of the world looming over Atlas, and presses on your heart with vice-like strength, with a wrenching squeeze that makes it difficult to breathe, and twists your insides so that what love you had for the person in the bed next to you becomes bitter, spiteful hate. Have you ever found yourself in a ragged, battered relationship with a person who leaves you so inexorably exhausted that sleeping next to them wears you out faster than the Boston Marathon? The exhaustion drains you of every vital fluid necessary to sustain a person's life. Like the fly caught in the web, you can feel God's favor as the spider pierces flesh and bone with its fangs, as it injects its neurotoxin, as the venom eats away your very core. God, how I hated being there. Have you ever found yourself remembering just how much you despise that person in the bed next to you? Yet deep down, you know you still love that person. It is a mind-numbing penance that insists that having this person in your life is the most necessary compliment you could ever receive. How ironic that I went through the disgust and desperate dislike only to realize, too late in fact of point, I actually loved you. God, how I hate being here. So here are 5 steps for writing a solid and moving elegy. Step 1, read well. This is a step I will frequently come back to because it's important to make sure that you are reading as much as you are writing. I'm always going to keep saying this. But this also gives you an opportunity to immerse yourself in the style of poetic forms. I recommend reading John Milton's aforementioned Lycidas or Alfred Lord Tennyson's Memoriam or Walt Whitman's O Captain, My Captain.
Captain, my captain.
Step 2, you need to prepare yourself. You need to be mentally and emotionally prepared to write an elegy because you are going to have to pour your emotions into what you write. This can't just be something made up on the spot. This is pulled from an experience that is deeply seated in the heart and mind of your emotions. Maybe take a walk or do some kind of calming meditation. Perhaps listen to music associated with the memory and experience that you want to invoke. If the subject of your poem is a lost loved one or friend, use pictures and video and memories to draw out that sense of loss. Step 3. Choose whether you want to incorporate rhyme into your poem. It's already going to be technical enough with the alternating syllable count. Adding rhyming, even something as simple as A-B, can add challenges that might hold you up from being able to finish the poem. It's not impossible. Just make sure that you've kept your rhyming dictionary on hand that I mentioned in the episode on lyrical poetry, which you can find right up here. Step 4, begin writing. It's time to finally sit down and write. Let those feelings drench you with emotion so that you can pour them out onto the page. Write about how the world has changed for you now that that person or that relationship is gone. Let the emptiness be visible in your words and let the world know what it is that you've lost. Then, once it's written, take a break. Take some time to decompress from reliving that experience. Finally, step 5, revise. After you've taken time to step back from writing the poem, go back in and review it with fresh eyes. The goal is to be objective about what you need to keep in the poem and what needs to be carved out. So that's it. Read well, prepare yourself, choose whether or not you want to incorporate rhyming or not, write the poem, and then take a break and revise. Once you have it written and revised, I'd love for you to share it in the comments section. You can also send it to me on Instagram or X at GKJ_publishing, or you can email me a copy at gkjpublishing@gmail.com. I'd love to offer you feedback.